Good afternoon. Everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Well, welcome to this wonderful event. For those of you that do not know me, my name is Rosa Solorio, and I actually have the honor of serving as Associate Dean for International and Comparative Legal Studies at this law school. And today is a very special day for us. We honor the extraordinary career of Judge Charles Broward, who most of you know, and the publication of his memoirs and very important experiences. And I just want to say a few things about Judge Broward before I actually basically share with you his bio and more information about what we're doing today on our program today. I believe he's undoubtedly one of the best and most influential jurists of his time. His career in the field of international law has been rich, multifaceted, and truly unique. Before I read his bio, which is very long, I'm actually just reading a very reduced version, right? The same for Professor Murphy. We could be here for hours just with their bios because they've done so much incredible work in international law. I also want to share how much we appreciate Judge Broward here at our law school. He has been connected to the law school for a few years now in many capacities, including as a distinguished visiting research professor of law. He has also offered numerous opportunities for our students to work with him and see him in action, which I consider a privilege. He has also supervised our SJD students and mentored many. And he has always greatly supported our international comparative law program with many activities. One thing that I've always treasured of Judge Broward is that despite all the accolades, prestige, and fame, he's friendly and approachable, has this incredible sense of humor and charm, and is always willing to share a good story, okay? And today we celebrate not only his accomplishments and career, but also the wonderful person that he is. In many ways, he's a model for all of us of how to carry a career in international law, how to carry yourself as a professional, how to be generous with your knowledge and with your experiences and the platforms that you have. So thank you, Judge Broward, for giving us today the opportunity to discuss your memoirs and for everything that you continue to do for this law school, our students, and all of those present today. And I just want to read his bio. Again, this is a very reduced version. I keep on doing caveats because we're talking about a 50-plus year career, right? So it's very difficult to really honor that career, in a small bio. But I just want to say that he has a 60-year career in the law, mostly international law, that has been divided between practice with White & Case LLP, first in New York City, then in DC, and then in public service. Basically, the latter began in late 1969 when he arrived at the State Department as Assistant Legal Advisor for European Affairs, after progressing to Deputy Legal Advisor, then Acting Legal Advisor over a bit less than 4 years. He returned to White & Case for the next decade, where he began to build the practice in international arbitration. In 1983, the Reagan administration appointed him as a judge of the Iran United States Claims Tribunal, which he remains after 40 years. Along the way, he served in the White House as sub-cabinet ranked deputy special counselor to President Reagan, assisting him in surviving the Iran-Contra scandal, as judge ad hoc of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and also in 3 cases at the International Court of Justice, more than any of the 4 other Americans ever so appointed. He has been honored with 6 Lifetime Achievement Awards or equivalents. He's obviously very close to our heart since he was actually a distinguished visiting research professor of law and all that he has done for our students in our law school over the years. And just lastly, I want to note that Amazon just ranked the book that he will be discussing with you today as the #1 new book on foreign and international law. So another accolade for him. And I also want to introduce to you, but he does not need any sort of introduction, Professor Sean Murphy, who we're very honored to have in our faculty at GW Law School. As most of you know, he teaches and writes and practices in the fields of public international law and U.S. foreign relations law. Before joining the GW Law School faculty in 1998, he served as legal counselor at the U.S. Embassy in The Hague, arguing several cases before the International Court of Justice and representing the U.S. government in matters matters before the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. And he also served as U.S. agent to the Iran U.S. Claims Tribunal, arguing cases on behalf of the U.S. government and providing advice to U.S. nationals appearing before that tribunal. Before 1987 and 1995, he served also in the U.S. Department of State Office of Legal Advisor. Among many distinguished international roles, Professor Murphy has served as a member of the UN International Law Commission, and in this capacity as Special Rapporteur for Crimes Against Humanity. He's also a member of l'Institut de Droit International, and Professor Murphy served for 10 years on the AGIL Board of Editors, and during 2018 to 2020 as President of the American Society of International Law. He was recently appointed by the President of the World Bank to serve as the chairman of a court of arbitration in a case filed by Pakistan against India. I also want to thank our many co-sponsors to this event today, including the American Society of International Law, the International Center for the Settlement of Disputes, the Georgetown International Arbitration Society, the George Mason International Law Journal, the GW International Arbitration Students Association, and the GW International Law Society. I also want to thank the many people that make these events possible. I want to start by thanking Leah Caliber, who's our visiting professor and fellow at the International Comparative Law Program. I want to thank also Jing-Si Dai, our program associate in the ICL program, also the wonderful Deb Gales and our conferences team in making all of this possible. Janet Potter from Disruption Books, who's the publisher of Judge Brower's memoirs, and also Jamie Eisman from the GW bookstore, who's actually here and is gonna be selling books later today, right? And hopefully you buy one. I'm buying one. So you should buy one, okay? And also Judge Brower is gonna be signing books as well, okay? Just wanted to tell you that we're gonna have the book discussion now, moderated by Professor Murphy. It will be followed by lunch in this same room, and also we're gonna have a space to sign books in the back room here. I will guide you through that after our book discussion. Also, Judge Brower brought a special pen for this. He has a special secret pen that he uses to sign books. You need to see the pen. He just showed me the pen and I was like, this is special.
Mont Blanc.
So just for that, you have to go and buy books and actually have him sign one, okay? So without further ado, I turn this to Professor Murphy, who will lead our dialogue today. And thank you so much for joining us for this event today.
Well, thank you, Rosa. Let me just do a little sound check. Can everybody in the back of the room hear okay? Yeah, good. Okay, so great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Rosa, for those very kind introductions. It's a wonderful turnout. It doesn't really surprise me because of who we are talking with today. And the book, if you haven't had a chance to look, it really is wonderful. It's a romp through the past 50 years of international law in a way that pieces it together in a particularly striking way, particularly as it relates to international dispute resolution. All right, I'm going to kind of stay out of the way here and ask relatively short questions. When I read the book, Charlie, there's not a whole lot on your youth before law school, but there was one particular story that jumped out at me a little bit. It's headlined, "My Father Fired Ronald Reagan." Tell us that story.
My father was one of the 5 dedicatees of the book. Grew up dirt poor, and basically ran away from home at 16, and went through high school in Freehold, New Jersey, our home state, and said, "I've got to go to college." What are you going to do? In those days, every county in New Jersey had the funds, some source to choose one person on the basis of a competitive written examination to get a 4 years full scholarship to State University Rutgers. So he spent the year after high school working as a hired hand on an uncle's small farm in New Jersey, studying like hell every minute. He won it. Where would I be where would my siblings be if he hadn't have gotten that scholarship? In the 1960s, his face was on the cover of Time magazine as a famous CEO, chairman of the board of one of the great few advertising agencies headquartered in New York. One of the clients he had was General Electric. And this guy, Ronald Reagan, for many years, his full-time job was getting paid by GE to be introducing GE Theater of the Air on television every week. And it was a very successful show. Now, however, the management of GE was kind of getting tired of the fact that he was, according to them, doing less work for GE and going around giving very strong anti-communist speeches, right-wing, so on and so on and so forth. So they wanted to offload him. Well, of course, nobody who's the real boss wants to do the job. They want to hand it to somebody else. So Ralph Cordner, then the CEO and chairman of the board of GE, called my father and said, I'd like you to do this. And actually, in those days, the advertising agencies put together the shows. It's different now, but in those days, they actually put together the shows. So Reagan shows up in my father's office. And according to my father, relayed through my mother, he cried. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I'm washed up in Hollywood. I don't know what I'm going to do. Now, Reagan since has denied that. But you'll find in the book Dutch, which was Reagan's nickname when he was a sports broadcaster. There's a reference to that and a couple of footnotes to me, my brother Brock, and my mother. Interestingly enough, years later, my father, still in his office, is invited to sit on the dais of a big, I think it was a big luncheon for the USO or something like that out in California. And so he's seated next to Nancy Reagan. And with a bit of trumpetry, he said, "Oh, Miss Reagan, I'm Charlie Brower of BBD&O." And she turned to him and said, "Charlie Brower, oh, Ronnie and I ate off you for years. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful time." Now, you'll see in the book, so I was asked to go work for Reagan to help get him out of Iran-Contra. And we spent a lot of time together in the Oval Office and principally. And I was always afraid maybe this would come up somehow. So I, of course, never mentioned I'd introduced myself to President Nixon when I was in the State Department. As he knew my father, and the relationship was, well, sort of okay. In any event, it never came up. It never came up. And you'll see there's a couple of interesting bits. Anyway, that's the story. My father fired Ronald Reagan.
And President Reagan did not return the favor by firing you at some point. Instead, he hired you and used you as his advisor. Let me ask you this, Charlie. The book really starts in terms of your own career when you're at law school. And we've got a number of students here currently in law school. One line that might jump out at them is, "My first year at law school was an academic disaster." So how does one have a first year of law school that's an academic disaster but still go on and have a pretty good career?
Yeah. Later I wound up in the Iran United States Claims Tribunal with a number of our, not mine, but a number of our judges, law clerks coming either straight from clerkship in the United States Supreme Court or going to it. Obviously, I never got there. Now, this is a story I was telling the other night when we had my former law firm, White & Case in New York, a launch. It was a disaster. You didn't add the C+, okay? Now you know what a disaster that is. Somehow I managed to get on the interview schedule the way it worked in those days with top law firms in New York City, which was, In those days, New York City was a Snow White of law practice, and all the other cities were the seven dwarfs. Now it's different, but anybody in their right mind who wanted to do it in the United States and wasn't loyal to some home state wanted to go to New York. And I could already read upside down. Very important skill, okay, for practicing lawyers. And I could see right away that the people who were interviewing me were thinking, I guess I can't throw him out of the room right now, so we'll chat a bit, but you know, I was dead on arrival. And I was interviewed by Lawrence B. Morris of White and Case, who was known to us all as the Bugle, because you could, when I did get to the firm, hear him all the way down the hall. A super guy. He was the only one, and you'll see in the dedication to him, because he cared. He looked at the CV and he looked at me and he said, wait a minute, you graduated cum laude from Harvard College. You were a Fulbright scholar in Germany for a year. You must be able to do better than this. And I said, I'd better be able to do this. I can't account for this. Some people do have a hard time first year adjusting from what they've been doing. So he said, I'll tell you what, can't hire you for the summer, that you're being interviewed, as you know, in the fall of your second year for a job between the second and third year on the basis your first year grades. That's it. He said, we can't hire you, but if your grade comes up to whatever it was in the second year, I want you to call me. I did, and I called him. And I did have a summer job. I don't even want to mention where it is. I think that firm no longer exists, but it wasn't really thrilling stuff. I called him up, and I spent the rest of the summer having lunch more or less every week with one or another, a couple of the partners of White and Case. And by the end of the summer, I was offered a position to start as associate on the 18th of September, 1961, because somebody took the trouble to care. And that was, there were sort of two beginnings of my career, getting to White and Case, and then becoming a partner, notwithstanding all the reasons. They might not have done it because I was not your standard associate in a lot of ways.
Well, let me
And then
ask you about that.
resigning 4 months later after becoming the
Yeah,
second.
I mean, I wanted to, follow on
yeah.
on that. You go to White and Case,
Yeah.
and certainly at that time, even to some extent today, the general idea is that you're going to stay for many years as an associate, become a partner,
If you
maybe
do.
rise in the ranks even there.
Mhm.
You seem to have taken an approach in your career where you're at a firm for a while, then you're in the government for a while, then you're on a court for a while or a tribunal, then you're back in a law firm. I mean, there's a lot of movement there that's not common, and I think that also probably is of interest to a lot of the students in the room who are thinking about
Yes.
their own paths
Right.
in the future. So, thoughts about why that was true for you and whether it should be true for others?
Well, you have to be very sure that whatever step you're taking is the right step for you. I always was. And I also add, it's very nice when you're young and you have no idea of the risks that you're taking when you take these steps. But a short history, I was destined to go into the United States Foreign Service. I had taken all the exams, had my number on the list to start by the time I graduated from Harvard College. But I got this Fulbright scholarship to Germany, so they extended it for a year to do that. Turned out, the United States government, by doing that, financed me out of the draft, which existed at the time. So when I graduated in 1961 from law school, I was 26, and nobody over the age of 25 was taken. So I was, and I didn't feel, although I had political interest as well, I didn't think in the state of New Jersey, unlike Iowa and some other places, you couldn't run for office without having been an officer in the Marine Corps or something like that. So in any event, I went to law school only because, as you will see, my Austrian-born pre-Second World War refugee to the United States was getting a PhD at Harvard, also in government, which was my field, but he was getting it because he had spent 4 years as a civil servant in the State Department after college. And this was Joseph McCarthy times galore. One of my own classmates at Harvard Law School, his father was one of the principal victims of that. So my supervisor said, I'm here to get a PhD because considering what happened and what's happened later in a more recent administration, you should have a PhD or a law degree. Well, my father, he was all for this. He said, you get a law degree. He said, my CEOs of all my clients are lawyers. Now there's something else, but that's another story. So do it. So I went to law school only because I thought it would enhance my future in the Foreign Service. And I did know people who were graduate lawyers in the Foreign Service. But then I get out and I have this job at White and Case. And I said, I'm 26 years old. I'd be stupid not to punch this ticket for 2 years before I go into the Foreign Service. Yes, I'll have to take the exams again, but if I passed them once, I should be able to pass them again. So that's how I wound up at law school. That's how I wound up at White and Case. I fell in love with litigating cases and fighting in real time, foot to foot with whoever was the adversary. And I was put on very interesting cases. We didn't have computers in those days. Some of my colleagues spent 2 years or maybe more in the document room sorting through boxes of documents that had to be produced by General Electric in the then famous trouble damage antitrust cases, private cases, but also the government cases against the 3 million manufacturers of turbines. So, no, I wound up doing the little stuff that big clients would throw off to. Clients were loyal in those days. And if someone didn't make partner, you could get them a good job with a client, and then they'd be your general counsel telling you what to do. In my Harvard College 60th reunion, that's 5 years ago, we were asked to write an essay about your life or whatever you want. Mine was entitled From Exploding Beer Bottles. That's part of what I was doing in New York for Anheuser-Busch. And so I talked with a lot of bartenders who were the claimants and other people. You'll see all the details of the build-up to a trial in the most gripping case we had there. Exploding beer bottles, defamation actions for McGraw Hill, so on and so forth. I got a lot of trial experience, and I think one of the reasons, anyhow, that I became a partner when I did, notwithstanding what I thought were all the reasons not to do it like that, I was doing all the wrong things. But I had a lot of trial experience, and then every time that let's say the chief judge of the Second Circuit, for example, at the time, call up a senior partner, and they knew each other, obviously, and say, we've got this guy up here who needs help under the Criminal Justice Act, has no money, blah, blah, blah. You must have a smart young man, they would say, back in the 60s, who could deal with this. So I wound up, as you'll see, doing handling. That was an appeal. It was already a conviction for conspiracy of espionage for the Soviet Union. And another one was the biggest stock fraud artist in American history up in the 50s. And anyway, I got incredible trial experience. But I've been sitting in a document room for 2 years and whatever. I think I was always identified as being troublingly impatient. So they sent me off to Legal Aid Society first or second summer. I was there to do New York City criminal court, drug, prostitution, you name it. And I learned about how the criminal justice system really works at the low level, which is not inspiring necessarily.
There's a theme there of seizing opportunities, I think, right? Instead of going into the document room, you're looking over and seeing some less, perhaps traditional opportunities and grabbing it because it gets you something. That theme also, I think, operates in terms of staying at the law firm, going into government, going to a tribunal, going back to a law firm. Lots of different stories of that kind. Let me draw out one of them. There's a famous case, Goldwater v. Carter, where Senator Barry Goldwater and a number of Congress members are going after Jimmy Carter for wanting to terminate the U.S.-Taiwan Mutual Defense Agreement.
Right.
So you're not representing Senator Goldwater.
No.
You're not representing the U.S. government, President Carter, but somehow you end up in the middle of the case. So again, seizing opportunities. How did that all happen?
Well, you have to, in this case, I seized an opportunity, but it almost killed me for reasons that you'll see politically. So, and you'll see how I resurrected myself with other people. That was really something. So you gotta, you take the, if there's a bird in hand and you don't know there might be two in the bush, you take it for a good case. So I got a call from Arthur Rovine, I was in practice, who was a classmate at Harvard Law School. At this point, he was assistant legal advisor for treaty affairs. And he calls me up at White and Case and he said, well, this Goldwater case, which had gone for Goldwater in the district court and was coming up on appeal in early December. Let me see, Carter was president, so this was the election of 1980. Yeah, exactly. So calls up and said, there is a terrific argument under the Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties that should be made in this case, but the Justice Department just won't touch it. Do you think you could find an amicus? There's one of them. Old ABA friends, Don Wallace, Georgetown International Law Institute. We had been chairs of the Section of International Law of the American Bar Association. As you could find some an amicus or some amici and be counsel. Said, sure, what a great opportunity. Not knowing that it could have been the death of me for reasons you'll read about. But sure, so we got that together and did the brief, so on and so forth. And I get a call before the day of the argument from the chief clerk of the court and says, Mr. Brower, can you come to the hearing tomorrow? I said, hey, try and keep me away. I'll be there, you bet. And he said, well, the reason I'm calling is because two of the judges have indicated they would like to ask you questions. Never happens. Never happens to an amicus. And I knew one of them, Malcolm Wilkie, who had, from time to time, when there was a Republican appointment to be made on the Supreme Court, he was close to it, never quite made it. But in any event, so I was there. Now, to tell you the truth, I can't, for the life of me, remember what the question was that was asked. But I operated on the assumption, you get asked a question, you'll figure out how to say what you think you want to say. And I do remember very well, remember the hostages were seized by Iran on the 4th of November of 1979. So this is the campaign of yeah, and
They're still being held by the fall of 1980.
oh yeah, actually they were there so they were there. And we're in early December, so it's just a few weeks later. And I'm saying, Your Honors, as we are convened this afternoon, the President of the United States is thoroughly occupied with the situation of the hostages who have been held just since last month as to what he can do. Now, one thing he can do is denounce, terminate the 1955 Treaty of Amity, economic relations, and consular rights that was concluded between the Shah and President Eisenhower. That could have serious consequences. But if you affirm the judgment below here, you will have stricken from the hands of the President of the United States a potentially important weapon he has to deploy to help resolve this problem. Well, we won hands down. They didn't mention anything about what I said. But that's okay. And so we won the case. As I say, Goldwater came back to bite me by writing the President of the United States with Hatch, Helms, Goldwater, Laxalt, campaign manager for Reagan, a guy, not Hubert Humphrey, but a guy from New Hampshire used to fly airplanes for one of the commercial airlines, and a guy out from Idaho who was another right-wing case. So that killed that, but I got to the United States claims tribunal.
So Goldwater loses essentially the
Yeah.
Goldwater v. Carter.
Yeah.
Therefore, Goldwater is not happy with Charlie Brower. And so, to the extent that Charlie Brower is going to be considered for a position in the executive branch, Goldwater and others are going to write a letter saying Charlie's not the guy for it, right?
Well, it was precisely Office of the Legal Advisor, because he was against us. There was a second paragraph saying, furthermore, he's weak on deep sea mining in the law of the sea. That helped me confirm who was doing this. I called Dean Birch, who had been Goldwater's campaign manager in 1964, because I had been on the President Ford political strategy team at the 1976 convention in Kansas City. By the way, if you haven't been to a national convention of a party and you want to see a parade of hookers from East Coast, left coast, all around, it's an unbelievable sight. So I would be writing, after a week of platform committee, I'd be writing speeches eventually to be given in the evening plenary sessions, depending upon how things went and who might be speaking. But in the evening, when the plenary sessions were held, I'd be sitting up there with other, I wasn't as young as I might have been at the time, but anyway, with junior people up there with Bill Scranton, Henry Kissinger, Nelson Rockefeller, blah, 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 blah. Dean Birch was one of them. He also happened to live at the time with one house between his and mine in Bethesda. And so I called Dean, and he remembered me, and he said, Charlie, Barry wouldn't do that. That's a staff job. And I said, Dean, you know it, and I know it, and I'm pretty sure who the staff member is, because I had worked with Goldwater's staff in opposing the legislation or resolution that requires notification to Congress when you're going to the
Case Act.
No. It was, and it went through only because it was voted on Thursday night after the Saturday Night Massacre, when Nixon threw out Archibald Cox. I just can't remember the name of it, but it basically obligates the administration in certain circumstances to notify that you're going to battle.
Oh, the War Powers.
War Powers resolution, exactly. Somehow, I knew. Now, the name of the person who was behind this was fighting hard for the position of legal advisor.
Therefore, didn't want you to be legal
Right,
advisor,
and
wanted.
wanted. The name is not in the book, but if that person reads the book, that person will know exactly how it came about.
You want to share the name with this group? Well, I'll take that as a no. Go ahead.
So then, and what I said was, look, I need another letter to the president signed by Goldwater. We don't need the other guys. If Goldwater does it, that'll be enough. Saying, well, that was about legal advisor, but I understand he's really very supportive of American investment abroad and protection of it and so on and so forth. So he would, because my second choice was, which was a great choice actually, was a better choice than if I had been legal advisor when Nicaragua went after the United States in 1984, and the legal advisor was ordered when they lost on jurisdiction never to show up again and to withdraw the United States' longstanding acceptance of the mandatory jurisdiction of the court.
So just to get the sequencing right here, Carter loses the election. He's out of office as of January 1981. Reagan comes into office. A new tribunal, the Iran U.S. Claims Tribunal, is being created. Your option of being legal advisor has disappeared,
Sure.
but this option of being a judge on the Iran U.S. Claims Tribunal is
Yeah.
a possibility.
And so we got Dean said, okay, get together with so-and-so up and just take the letter that you want Goldwater to sign. If there are any problems, let me know. I mean, that was just such a lifesaver because, you know, I could have been dead if I hadn't had this connection and thought of it. So I always say the start I got by being taken into White and Case was fantastic because I wound up a partner, resigned 4 months later, and arrived at the State Department in a job that I obviously had a political background I should have mentioned in my home state of New Jersey. I'd already been elected as a Northeastern Liberal Republican in those days to local office and was expected to run for Congress. And when Peter Frelinghuysen would release the seat after many years. But I decided on the basis of my experience traipsing around the Senate leadership on both sides and the House leadership and the particular committees involved that it only dawned on me much later in my life, my instinct was not to have as few people as possible in the world determining my course. Let me pick up one thing you said about opportunity. Identifying opportunity when other people don't is key. I come into White and Case, and I'm sitting with 6 or 7 other guys, what we call the bullpen, which was where the brand new associates were collected. So a more senior associate comes in the office one day. Any of you guys like to summarize a transcript? Well, most of the others wanted to do corporate work, so they weren't interested anyhow. But I was one of my friends. We were destined for litigation. I'm the one who says, "What's it about?" I said, "Well, it's a will contest in the Second Department Court of Appellate Court." I said, "What's it? Okay, what's it about?" "A will contest." I said, "Who's handling it?" Orison Marden. Orison Marden was or about to become president of the American Bar Association, and he was the #1 guy in the firm. And I'm thinking, give it to me. So I'm thinking, yeah, scut work. Okay, well, look, we all do that. You don't get anywhere in life without doing a lot of that. Some can be very unpleasant. But if I do a good job, I should have asked if you could all hear in the back. I haven't heard anybody waving hands. Okay, good.
I want you to start at the beginning, if that's okay.
Beginning of the book?
Beginning of the conversation.
We don't have enough time.
Okay.
I want to sign some for these kind people. So I think if I do a good job on this, then maybe he'll ask me to draft a brief. And if I do a good job on draft a brief, I'm not going to get to argue the case. I'll just be there in the court. But if I do a good job on that, maybe he'll ask me to do something else. Next thing I had from him was a Supreme Court case, and a very important labor case. And on and on and on it went. And yeah, so so he was one of the 2 people I went to at the top of the firm in November of 1968 when Nixon was elected and said, another reason why I shouldn't have been won the partnership. But in any event, I'm a 7 point some months year associate, so I'm on the cusp. I'm not thinking much about it, but anyway, said, I don't want you to hear this from the grapevine or gossip. You need to know it from me. I'm not miserable and unhappy. To the contrary, I'm very happy here. If I should ever have the opportunity to become a greater part of it down the road, that would be wonderful. But my destiny, and it was for political reasons to enhance my CV, but also because I was always internationally oriented since 18, and I badgered my parents into paying for me to go to Germany on a student trip just coming out of high school, and it's just gone on since then. But my destiny, as I see it, is to get a good job in Washington if I can with this administration. Well, that might have knocked me out of the running, because every time you make someone a partner in the firm, some other people are disappointed and will probably go away, but in some cases. And so it took me a while to get the job. So they make me a partner in July 1, 1969, the next year. And so I'm able to come to Washington as someone who for 4 months had been a partner of the firm and gone on. But look for opportunity. If you have the analytical ability to see opportunity, that's what you do. And that's the key to everything else that happened. I'll also say, if I'd never gotten involved in politics and never gotten to Washington, partially as a result, the rest never would have happened. You have to have, I saw when Nixon was elected that the people who were getting the best jobs were people like Elliot Richardson, who was installed as number 2 at the State Department and subsequently had, I think, 4 cabinet positions still. They had been 20-somethings in the Eisenhower administration. You could see, and I said, I better get to Washington now, okay? If I can. And it was, and it was a combination of college and law school friendships, and who was working there. I got tipped off anyway. So
the book could have any number of different titles, but you chose Judging Iran, and that makes some sense given that you have had a career that's intersected with Iran in different ways.
Right.
One is you were appointed to the Iran-U.S. Claims Tribunal, not just once but twice. Another was that you were an advisor to President Reagan in the Iran-Contra affair, as you said. A third is you were appointed twice as an ad hoc judge of the International Court of Justice in cases brought by Iran. Unfortunately, we don't have time to talk about all those, but here's a general question relating to that. These are 2 countries that have had terrible diplomatic relations since 1979.
None.
It seems like the recipe for there not being any role for international law in addressing that relationship, but that seems not to have been the case. Your thoughts?
Oh, well, it's pretty simple. Jimmy Carter was defeated by Ronald Reagan. After that election, it's always been my belief, they felt, we were suffering. I mean, Iran was suffering. We had captured all of its assets abroad that we had any ability to capture. They were getting a terrible reputation. The United States went to the International Court of Justice and immediately got provisional measures saying, release these people. These are all but 2 of them were diplomatic or consular personnel. Had 2 resolutions of the Security Council doing the same, and they're looking at, should we deal with Carter, or should we wind up dealing with Reagan? They were frightened of that. And so it was after the election that the Majlis, their alleged parliament, came up with a number of conditions these are the conditions on which we will consider making a deal. It was what we call a Mexican standoff. I mean, you had two parties that had a lot to lose, and Jimmy Carter lost in good part, I think, because of that situation. And yeah, so that's how it happened. And I remember Warren Christopher, who was Deputy Secretary of State, and together with Robert Sutherland, who was the legal advisor, they went over there, and this was negotiated, of course, through an intermediary in Algiers. I remember I had dinner sometime after that with Warren Christopher, and he said, "That's when I learned, actually, you can survive without any sleep." He said he'd go back to the embassy in the bedroom they gave him and so forth. He'd just lie there staring at the ceiling until it was time to get up. But I think that really is the secret why that happened. So I was asked at another, earlier in the week, at a launch and wait case, that well, what about Russia and Ukraine? I said, we haven't gotten to a Mexican standoff yet.
Well, it highlights
that's
how you need the right circumstances to bring about the ability of law to come into
That's
it.
right.
It's the assets on one side,
Right.
hostages on the other, creates the tribunal that allows you to move forward. What about the ICJ? We basically have that Treaty of Amity still in place between the U.S. and Iran.
It was terminated on the 5th of October, 2018, so it's out.
After the two, I was getting
After
the
those two cases, that's right.
So again, you had an opportunity for Iran, despite the bad
Right.
diplomatic relations,
Right.
to go after the U.S. at the ICJ
Yeah.
based on that 1955 treaty. What was your sense of being an ad hoc judge on the court?
Was great.
You liked it?
Well, I had the advantage by that time of having lived a number of years in The Hague full-time for the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal, and I was in 2018 when I was appointed by the, just in passing, you may not have picked up, I say I've been 40 years at the Iran-United States Claims Tribunal, which is true, but there are different levels of involvement. So it's correct, I was appointed by the Reagan administration as a titular member the first time, by the outgoing Clinton administration in a secret, covered by the election of 2000, yes, of 2000, and by the next previous administration to the present one, to these two cases. I had been appointed by Colombia in the third case. So it's having whatever it is that make people of different parties and situations think you're the person, of course, is that was key to this. I never expected to be sent back by the Clinton administration. Again, it was an act of courage of the then legal advisor who got it through. No, I was...
Ad
was
hoc
it-
on the ICJ.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had the advantage of knowing a lot of the judges already because we associated in The Hague. So a lot of people knew me. I had a reputation that a lot of ad hoc judges don't have historically. Now it's getting much better. But it was really, the only thing I didn't like about it is they take the junior most person to first say what that person thinks in the deliberations. Everybody's thinking about what they're, but anyway, you know, you get used to it. I found it a very interesting process. Actually, you'll see Joan Donahue, who is president, has done the forward in the book, and two other judges, Tomka and Yusuf, who I worked with there, who have been presidents in the past, and on top of them all, this guy, Sean Murphy, with a wonderful blurb. I never told you you get a free book.
Oh, great.
Okay, so
Nice.
if you already bought one, well, subscribe to. No, it was a very interesting experience. Now, I served there also with David Caron, who many of you will know was my very first law clerk back in 1984, 1985. And we were just very close friends for the rest of his life, which was ended far too early. But he was appointed by Colombia, as I was, in two separate but semi-related cases at the court in 2014. And because there was one common jurisdictional issue to the two cases about the Pacto de Bogotá, there was a joint deliberation on that point of, you see, Crawford couldn't sit because he was conflicted, so it was 14 elected judges, and then 4 judges had 18 judges. And so we sort of the highlight of our careers together were those deliberations. And after that, he had a nice picture taken. We're walking out of there, and we're thinking and saying, you know, it's interesting work, but the International Court of Justice is not necessarily the topmost collection of international lawyers of the world. Some of them come there from being domestic judges, not knowing anything about it, and because of the geographical spread, which is mandated by the statute, and then has informally been allotted continentally, is no. But at the young people who are the associate legal officers, who are hired, some with PhDs, some working on PhDs, some are never getting PhDs. What an impressive bunch. And what they now call the judicial fellows, who come in straight from law school for 8 months or some period of time. They're very impressive.
Several from this
impressive.
law school, in fact, have gone on to do
Yeah,
that. So
yeah.
we've been very fortunate.
So, but that's something to, if you're really gung-ho for international law and you're in a position to be able to try potentially successfully for that, that's a great thing.
All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to draw this to a close. But one final question: any particular regret about your career? Something you didn't do? Something you wished you had done? Agreeing to have Murphy moderate this could be on the table. Any particular regret?
Professionally, none whatsoever.
Ooh, nice.
And I've just, they knock you down, figure out how to stand up again. And I've just been so fortunate. I can't explain how all of this happened. I've given some clues. But it was a series of people for whom I worked. Jack Stevenson, the legal advisor, who just raced me through offices, and David Apshire, who was the person in the Oval Office on the cover of this book, me, who was the assistant West Point graduate, PhD in history, decorated for valor in as a platoon commander, then company commander in the Korean War, who was assistant secretary and a very powerful behind-the-scenes, smart guy in Republican circles. He had worked for Nixon and Ford in the Congress. He just came to Jack Stevenson one day and said, Fulbright is giving me just all kinds of holy hell. I'm not a lawyer. I need one of your best people to get on the train with me and do all this work in Congress. He did so many things for me later in my life, bringing clients to me, getting me to the 1976 Republican Convention when the political strategy, the President Ford Political Strategy Committee was chaired by a 30-something chief of staff for Ford, who later became vice president of the United States. It's just, I don't know. People pick you up for some reason, and yeah, I can say no regrets about that. And look, I've older than probably most of you think, or at least a little bit older than most of you probably think, but I've stopped taking on new appointments because I don't think it's ethical at my age, and I resigned a year ago from the cases at the court. An important lesson that too many people don't understand is know when you're at the top, go out at the top. Keep your reputation intact. And then do what you can to keep on in some way. Write a book.
Please join me in thanking Charlie Brower for